Hello again. So I'm going to make an attempt to complete the newest contract in RP-0. It's the station contract. There's a lot of interesting things to show off while doing that. So even if I find the contract is broken, I mean, one, that'll be useful because then we can fix it so that people can actually complete that contract in the future. And even if it fails or I fail, I can still discuss a lot of interesting mechanics and strategies. So docking with a station is really interesting. It won't be your first docking in an RP-0 career. I should have loaded up the launchpad beforehand. But anyway, I'm fine talking over a black screen. Probably won't be your first docking. There is a first attempt, first mission for first docking in the game. So kind of the American path, that would be, there's the Gemini mission where, I'm trying to remember, why is my memory so terrible in the morning? So it's the Gemini craft, which carried two people, and 65, 66, I believe. It's a bit wobbly of a craft. I have to be careful sending it into orbit. I think it's a bad joint in here. And so that Gemini craft successfully rendezvoused. So rendezvous is if you get into a similar orbit, so you can see the other craft. You're within range that, in theory, if you had a little more fine control or wanted to, and you had the ports, you could actually dock. So rendezvous is, in my experience, it's most of the difficulty of a successful mission for docking. Is just getting the two craft in the same orbits as each other. Oh man, the station is so wobbly. I don't know why. I've got Kerbal Joint Reinforcer. It just really is unhappy with itself. So let me turn down the gimbal because I don't want it overcompensating here, because it looks to be wobbling in here, but in actuality it's just that it's from the perspective of the top capsule it's wobbling, but overall the center of mass really wasn't wobbling much. So you have to just get into a matching orbit with the other guy. So that's rendezvous, and that was done a number of times before those first dockings. I think a Gemini got into rendezvous with another Gemini, and then Gemini and Aegina. So an Aegina is a target. It's it's an upper stage. It was used to send some probes to the moon before that, and then it was adapted to have a docking port compatible with the Gemini craft attached to it, and then put into an orbit. And I'm trying to remember. I don't remember exactly which one was launched first, but of course it would be really obvious if I looked it up. But one craft is launched into an orbit, let's say 300 kilometer by 300 kilometer, something nice and simple like that. And then the second craft was thrown up quite shortly after that, if I recall correctly. Like literally once the first one reached orbit, the other one was sent. And I'll show you why that was with my docking. So first I'm setting up a station, and the station contract is to... Here's the beginning of it. So I have to, oh, that's weird. Oh, it's below 2000, right. So I need to at least be in a 400 by 400 orbit, because your periapsis is the low point of your orbit. So, if it was, say, 350 by 400 or flip the numbers, the low point is still considered the periapsis. So it has to be 400 by 400 at least. So I'll aim for that, or 450. And some of that will actually be a little tricky, kind of depending on the actual design of your craft. In my experience, like how long you want a longer burning time upper stage, so you have more control over exactly what orbit you place it in. Because if it burns through too quickly, you're not actually going to have enough time to get up to that, to that orbit and make a kind of a circular orbit. You'd experience that if you ever try to actually the heading doesn't matter too much with this, so I'll just leave it be so the thing doesn't wobble itself to death. Also, it hits. There we go. Dynamic pressure is coming down. But yeah, my goal with this craft, and it's got you'll see it when the cap comes off. Oh, I might have to start taking manual control. It's already starting to wobble. See the yaws switching back and forth to try to correct that, but it might actually be making the wobble a bit worse. Yeah, I previously tried to do this contract, and it seemed like it didn't recognize my rendezvous, and I recently downloaded a correction from the RP-0 GitHub, so I can hopefully properly test it. Okay, so I just can't set SAS, I can't set anything, I can barely just like tap the gimbal. This craft is really difficult to put in orbit, which is kind of interesting. Obviously not for the same reasons as as an actual proton. Like the engines I'm using on this are reminiscent of the proton rockets the Soviets used. Obviously the shape is not. The shape is to just wanting to get it together quick, because my install is getting rather crashy. So I just want to kind of get this test done, and then I don't have to spend too much time in this RP-0 install. There we go. But the actual proton craft, the Soviets had been intending to do a lot more with it than they ended up doing. But even though it's a big, powerful rocket, it could have launched a lot of mass into orbit, potentially even with humans. But they never ended up doing that, and I think that's possibly, some part of that would have been due to a lack of funds, and another portion of that issue simply was that it wasn't as reliable as you'd want a rocket to be if you're putting people's lives in its hands. All right, so I'm actually on a rather good trajectory to hit that orbit I want to hit, all things considered. Here, let me make sure my brightness and everything is sane. Yep, looks good. I think I kind of hacked for some reason I couldn't get CCAN. Oh, right. Oh, good. I couldn't get CCAN to install Planet Shine, but I might have got Planet... No, I didn't. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, this install is crashy. It's a very poorly behaved install, but that's because I test so much stuff in it, which is in part, what kind of limits how long I can kind of quote-unquote play many installs. Just because if you're switching in and out testing versions of things, at some point it starts to become unhappy and poorly behaved. But the Proton rocket, I think I was just looking at a version today made by Raider Nick, which it looks really good, and it has the TKS V or VA spacecraft in it, which was used as a resupply module for some of the early Soviet stations. Okay, I should be able to, yep, I can pop off the clamshell now, and you can see my lovely station. I'll pop these out. But that craft, it wasn't initially designed, in theory, to just be a resupply craft for space stations, because it's so big in the way it was designed. But it actually had life support and a return capsule. So in theory, if the Proton had been reliable or cheaper or something, it could have been used as a human-rated capsule. So my Proton, or I call it a Noton because of the terrible shape. Clearly is not shaped like an actual Proton rocket like the Soviets. The Russians still use it today for a geostationary transfer. They sell the services for satellite contracts. I'm not doing too bad for the orbit. I want to be a bit higher, so let me look at my times. So let's see. But the Proton in history wasn't the most reliable rocket ever made. And mine similarly has issues with the first stage, trying desperately to wobble off. And so I think it's fitting that I probably also would not trust my Noton Proton with human lives. So it's really tricky to target an orbit. But if I think this is tricky, then I'm in real trouble for the rendezvous, because rendezvousing a rocket to the same orbit, or a kind of a matching similar enough orbit, is even more difficult. So first things first, I need to get this into the sufficient orbit. So the craft, along with the other requirements in this contract, it needs to have space for 4 people, so that's why it has this big crew cabin that will support 4 people, and I threw the science module on, and I used an Apollo docking system because I don't have anything installed with a more Soviet-style docking system. There we go. I should probably arc down now, because the time to APO is increasing substantially. And so even though I do want to get above 285, and that keeps rising, I don't want to go so much above it just based on time. That's 2 minutes till I actually hit that altitude, and I only have 4 minutes and change of stage left. So this will allow me to dock people. So Apollo docking, I can transfer fuel, and as you can look at it, it's clearly even graphically designed to be able to transfer humans. And I have a propellant-only docking port on the other side. And just because I felt it was a waste to have nothing else on the other side. And I've got these big hydrazine tanks and big hydrazine thrusters on it. And I put them around the center of mass of this craft, because I didn't do that in one of my earlier attempts. And man, it was a difficult craft to move around. Okay, And I'm still in the process of viewing my lunar attempt videos. I found that there was kind of a duplicate one because I kind of, I made a first one and there was some kind of glitch in it. I think because I was running out of memory, and then the second video I made was basically starting over from scratch. So I still need to run back through those before I could potentially post them. Let's see, surface velocity, arc up. So I want to be at about over 400, but really even if I hit like 300 by 400, I can use the thrusters on here in order to get myself into an over 400 orbit. So that's the first step of rendezvous, is putting your spacecraft into an orbit that you can reach with another craft. Of course, it also has to meet these specs, but that's obvious. I think I want to arc a little higher because I still have 3 minutes of fuel left. So I feel like I can play with this a little bit more. Let's see, 3 minutes and that. So I can slow that down. So in exchange, I'll get more altitude, because I've got plenty of fuel on this to get the station in orbit. That's another useful thing. Even if you've seen, okay, you can get into RSS orbit with 9,000 meters per second of delta V or 10,500, whatever you've seen, or depending on the type of craft you use, you want to do a test flight and then make sure that you leave yourself a couple of hundred of meters per second or so of spare, just in case, if you're doing something new, right? You want to leave yourself a little bit of leeway. And it's going to be really tricky with the second craft, because when I come up to rendezvous with this, because there's so many difficult things to balance. It's really rendezvousing two craft is the thing that keeps drawing me back to considering, writing KOS code. Although of course nice people like Bevo LJ and others have shared KOS code they've written themselves. Like I literally tried for a few hours or half a day to a day, like a year or two ago, when the KOS, it's you can write code to control your craft. When I feel like it was relatively immature, the language, not as a slight against it or anything, just compared to how much better KOS has got nowadays. Like I was just trying to get it to recognize, okay, you've tilted off the wrong direction, you need to gimbal the engine back, and I couldn't even get it to do that. So me not learning that language very well and it being a bit of an awkward language at that time. But now people do some really complex things with it, and they're nice enough to share the code. So with all the handy numbers you can pull from tools like MechJeb or just from the stock system, I feel like I could probably write some KOS code to do some good rendezvous. Okay, so now I'm kind of approaching my thrust to weight ratio is getting really high, so I'm actually going to have to arc a little bit below the horizon so that this number comes down to match that number. So at first, I do want this to get really close to zero or negative even, because even though I'm not changing my pitch or anything, so this is decreasing slower and slower with time. And I'm just right now, I think actually I'm just on kind of the balance where it's going down just as I want it to, because it's going down at a relatively regular speed because the functions are kind of matching each other, and the vertical speed is decreasing enough that I think I'll actually be able to level out pretty soon, which is handy. So you don't have to get into orbit or anything by any means this exact same way, but I find it really useful for just at a glance being able to control where you end up by watching vertical speed, time to apo, burn time left over. There we go, and I am in orbit, so I just want these will flip over in a moment, and over 400. There we go. So the real Proton, if I were to launch this with in Kerbal 1.1, I'll definitely use Raider Nix Proton, because the real third state of the Proton doesn't just have this core engine, it has 4 verniers, because this center engine can't actually gimbal on the real one. And so when you're nearing the orbit you want to be in, you could just shut down the center engine, and then you'll have way less thrust with just the 4 tiny vernier engines around it. But then that lets you fine-tune your orbit much more, which is just a great way to do things. And so now this stage is spent. I don't even think it has restarts. Nope. So I'm done with it. It is now space garbage. I've jettisoned it, and I will push away from it. So I'll get myself, let's say, to 470 kilometer orbit. I like nice round numbers because it makes calculations nice. From what I can tell, MechJeb doesn't have exactly the some of the numbers and tools that I want. Although if somebody recognizes that that I'm wrong, please point out which menu I can find it in. The thing I'm referring to will be in the next video. Let's see, so maneuver planner. All right, so I want to circularize this orbit because I want it to be 470 by 470 because both ends of this orbit have to be above. So change Perry at next apo. No, wait, I want to circularize. So that's a way to customize it. Let's say I wanted to get this to 400, so I wanted precisely 470 by 400 instead. So that, boom, it created a node. It'll tell me exactly where I should burn and for how long and everything. So you can really customize that if you want, but what I want is a straight circular orbit. And so do it at the next apo. I could do the opposite if I wanted. There's all kinds of neat things you can set. But in this case, I just want at next max height, apoapsis. I want you to level out. So it's 470 by 470. Now that's probably wrong. I think it's going to take more than 2 seconds for it to burn to that. Sometimes I don't do this step where I aim myself beforehand because you'll see why in the next video when you do phasing orbits. So when you have two things that are in similar orbits, and then if you can use a MechJeb tool to tell you roughly in the future when your orbits will match up to a certain position, doing this like a day out from when you plan to do a burn, like many orbits in the future if you plan to do something, it will cause havoc. Like even here you could see this number was changing just a tiny bit, and that could cause havoc with something that you plan to do like 10, 20, 30 orbits in the future. So there we go. So I should be able to get this into this video. Execute next node. Okay, so it's just auto warp powers. There we go. Okay, so this will warp, and do I have it? Yeah, I have it nicely lit. Yeah, I wish I could have got Planet Shine installed for in with this install, but just like any really complex tons of mods, Kerbal install, just not everything can come in, or not everything will work perfectly. But Planet Shine would cause the planet side of this, when it's on the day lit side of the Earth, to light up nicely with a bit of blue reflected light from the Earth. Okay, so it's totally going to be wrong with that, unfortunately. I should have tried to estimate it. But there we go. Yeah, see, it's going to be a really long burn time to come. So I'm going to do that off screen. I'm going to let it do a once around. Now I know the burn time is 14 minutes, so I'll try to split the difference. I'll, at T minus, at node minus 7 minutes or so, I will set it up. So as you can see, the acceleration of this stage is really low, but that's okay. I have plenty of RCS fuel. These are really large hydrazine tanks that I brought up, so I can easily achieve this. I'll just do it off screen. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and the next video will show some very very interesting things, because I'll have to launch from the ground into the exact same plane as this station with my crewed craft. So see you again later.